Hano Taunan, Don Namitin Oma, tobacco. Comina Chemitin, Kawice what the Kakachantan, Kawice what Kato Visiga, Aspenotaski we promoted, a what done, Equa we were, Equa Oasisa, we are Wamina, Equa Kaka Owakoma Kante, Equa Kakio Tantemaga Atoski, which what ne temaga, Kato Visga, Aspenotaski Kapamote, Hano Taunan. Mr. Hiki Tatame, Mr. Hiki Koi would say, I got to this up, Hey, this tobacco is sacred. It's been blessed. You can go put it anywhere we want here.
I am an Indigenous man living in Canada. I am walking the painful path of my ancestors on this land. Like them, I have suffered continuous racism, abuse, and discrimination. My government has done everything it can to rob me of my culture, language, pride, identity. The many challenges I experienced in my life stemmed from my race, but also from my unique genetic being. I was born different, which made my life journey a lot more challenging. You live in a world where light can be painful. You live in a world where sound can be painful. You live in a world where light touch can be painful. I was born with a neurological development disorder known as autism. In addition, I have some learning disabilities. I suffer from post-traumatic stress. Most of my disabilities are invisible, but when my symptoms get triggered, I shut down completely. I lose the ability to function. I lose the ability to work, eat, or sleep. Sometimes I can't even speak. Sometimes it lasts for hours or days. Sometimes it lasts for weeks. At times, it has left me feeling hopeless and feeling depressed. Many in my condition have contemplated suicide. Me? I'm resilient. I bounce back. I have unfinished work to do. I still need to bring awareness to the suffering of my people. I owe it to them. I owe it to my children. I owe it to myself. When I was a child, I dreamed about having a stable, loving family, living in a nice home, having food to eat, wearing warm clothes. I also had dreams that I was in a foreign country, walking down narrow old streets, touching ancient stones. As I grew older, I followed my dreams, and again, I found myself getting close, but then having everything taken. As for the mysterious dreams of traveling to that other country, that was something that seemed like an impossible, elusive dream until 2017, when I found myself halfway around the world, visiting the very country that I saw in my dreams. This experience gave me a new perspective on my life, a viewpoint that ultimately changed my life and helped me start again, rebuilding and trying to achieve those lost dreams. I came back with hope for myself, and hope that I could inspire my people.
I think that you've got a unique perspective that should be and has to be shared with others.
My visions of visiting Israel became a reality thanks to my friends, Professor Solly Dreman and his wife Orly. Solly and Orly came from a world that was foreign to me. Solly is an accomplished clinical psychologist and professor emeritus at Ben-Gurion University in the Negev. He is a very highly intelligent human being, well above average intelligence. He is eccentric and has his little ways about him. When I met Solly, there was a human connection there, and that's something I struggle with. That doesn't happen with everybody, and it doesn't happen often. Orly is very caring and a little bit over. I'm not used to that level of attention, and I kind of like it. She spoils me. So she pays attention to little details. She sends you little reminders, and it's little things that you read about moms doing that I never had. So Orly and Sully are family to me, the kind of family I never had, the family that every child deserves, a family I could only dream of.
What are you photographing now?
Everything. And so this becomes a story of how friendship can inspire hope for an individual and even for a people. This is our story. I am Don Barnard. I was born in 1969. My mother was white. My father was Indigenous. My father's side, we also have Black roots.
I have a dream.
The 60s were a time of revolutions in social norms and social order, a time where people from around the world demanded and earned their freedom. But the 60s were a tough time for Indigenous people in Canada. Racism and discrimination against First Nations people was widely accepted. It was a cultural norm. Today, we call it cultural genocide. Back then, it was a reference to kill the Indian in the child. Everybody believed it was the right thing to do.
I was a Crown ward. That meant to me that I was no longer part of my family.
5 generations of my family were decimated by these policies and acts, from the residential schools, the administration of the Indian Act, the foster care system, even kids that were kidnapped and put up for adoption or into foster care, which is what happened to me. That was referred to as the 60s scoop.
This is a special adoption program. While we have had reasonable success in placing white children for adoption, we have had great difficulty in placing Indian and Métis children.
Like how violent this whole process was, just with residential schools, you're taking the most vulnerable people from one nation group, pulling them out and eliminating that concept of nationhood in that person. And so when you move forward to things like the 60s scoop, that's just the continue on of that same purpose, that same legacy, but just different institutions.
I was born into a genocidal culture, and I'm a survivor of it, but I still struggle with the long and continuous effects of it. On top of this, or because of it, my family was dysfunctional by any account. My parents split up when I was very, very young.
That marriage only lasted about 2 years.
Yeah?
Yeah, she was an alcoholic. Something I didn't know.
I suffered abuse by both of them. When I lived with my mom, the abuse was neglect. I would go to school, I wouldn't have lunches, I wouldn't have proper clothes. My mom had problems with alcoholism and substance abuse. I can remember where she threw a beer bottle and it broke on my face. The physical abuse was worse when I stayed with my father. My father was a mean drunk. I remember you got mad because you'd been drinking and you thought that I was being disrespectful to an adult. And you hauled me out of my bed and you beat me with a belt and you snapped your belt buckle in half on me. You used to have
I don't remember that.
I worked with Don on a few projects, and Don told me his childhood story and the abuse that he went through at home. And I could not understand how parents can be so cruel to their child. But then he told me his parents' stories and their suffering and the abuse that they went through. And not that it's any excuse for abusing children, but you sort of see what intergenerational trauma can do to people.
So my mother suffered a lot of trauma as a child, and she dealt with it with drugs and alcohol.
Can you tell me a little bit about your mom and dad and your childhood?
It was pretty rough.
Yeah.
They were alcoholics. Well, I left home when I was 7 years old.
My father, like many other Indigenous people, was taught self-hatred. When he looked at me, I think he saw everything he hated about himself. One of the things my dad hated about me was the fact that it was apparent I wasn't normal. Another thing that bothered him was that me and my sister were darker. So people would call us Indians. And
you would think that the challenges that Don had at home were enough for one child to endure. But for him, the pattern of hardship and challenges just got worse when he started school.
I would have classic autism symptoms. And I'd go into school and I'd be overwhelmed, overloaded, and suffering, and I'd put my head down on the table and then get in trouble for not paying attention. Kids picked up on the fact that I was very, very intelligent, and they would call me names like Brainiac and Know-It-All and blah, 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 blah. Finally, teachers realized that they needed to do something about it, and I was sent to be tested. When they did the testing,
they realized that he was extremely smart.
Don was on the autistic spectrum with an IQ of 167.
They did identify all the symptoms of autism, but they didn't make a proper diagnosis. They missed it. They identified dyslexia. They identified dyscalculia. It's similar to dyslexia in that it's a math disorder.
You probably never knew this, but I was undiagnosed autism. I don't know if you know what autism is.
I got a clue, but not much.
I was not diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum until I was in my 30s. My friend and MLA, Dr. John Gerard, who took a personal interest in me and has extensive background in autism and disabilities, sent me to be tested.
Has historically been a problem with people being able to get an accurate diagnosis and to be able to get support and acknowledgement of the disability.
The teachers moved me to higher grades, but failed to address my disabilities and my special needs. I still got bullied, and teachers were still baffled on what to do with me.
And I wound up moving from Matlock, Manitoba, over to Kenora. Basically, I ran away. I ran to my grandmother's house.
Don had been actually doing remarkably well in high school.
I even made some friends, which was not easy for me.
And so I walk up to him and I said, "Hi, I'm Don. We're going to be friends." That was basically it.
Yeah, I believe you said I'm your new best friend.
I'm your new best friend.
Child and Family Services started to fish around my grandmother's house. And eventually I was removed from the only home I'd ever known.
You know, the next day I drop over on him and he's not home. And another day goes by. I've called and there was no anything.
And all of a sudden he was in foster care.
I can say with 100% certainty that if I had been white, they would have looked for other solutions.
The people in the Indigenous community had more children who were being apprehended, and that was an area of considerable concern.
Don had lived through a horrendous childhood, being placed in approximately 30 different foster homes, being subjected to abuse in almost every residence he had been in.
In the foster homes, there were primarily two types of abuse. I had one foster parent try to sexually assault me, and that ended badly for him, and it wound up with the police being there. And the second kind of abuse that happens in foster care is being paraded. And these people are parading you around like this little rescue dog that they've rescued, and everybody's congratulating them on what wonderful people they are. Their actions affect your sense of identity, your core values and beliefs of who you are and where you fit in a society. Forcing you to change religion. You have to go to their church with them. You can't go to your own church. You get a lot of negative talk about the natives, and all this is negative reinforcement about your ethnicity.
They placed me with the black family. There I didn't feel I fit in because I wasn't totally black. There was some native in me, and I didn't know whether it was whether to be Indian or whether to be black.
And being told everything about your sense of identity is wrong and bad unless you adopt what they're telling you to do is a difficult situation. And then threatening to throw you out or actually throwing you out when you don't want to submit to the demands. Well, how can they parade you if you won't go with them?
And then he was essentially put on the street with very little and wandering homeless for a couple of years.
On the streets is the absolute worst place you could ever put an autistic child. You've got no place to live, you've got no place to sleep, you don't know where your next meal is going to come from. You live in a world where unexpected things can be overwhelming. And people take advantage, people exploit. You're not able to defend yourself. You are on some level recording everything that's happening and you're aware of it. And when you do come out of the meltdown, yeah, you've been violated and taken advantage of and you know it. Dr. Brahm is a clinical psychologist. He is the founder and general director of the Israel Psychotrauma Center. When I was in Israel, we had an interesting discussion about trauma.
Complex traumatic situations like abuse by parents or by others, they have this very strong impact where the expectation of the child becomes that the world will be bad to them.
It was not unusual for somebody who's had a very difficult time in child and family services, irrespective of the autism spectrum disorder, to have post-traumatic stress.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, in a way, is a continued survival mode. That is not an illness. It's feeling that, you have to survive right now. So you see children also with less ability to regulate their bodies, to regulate their emotions, to regulate their relationships. Trauma does not make you immune for later experiences. It makes you more at risk.
It provides for very serious life challenges.
My life has been a very hard path to walk. I was married twice. Both marriages failed miserably. Due to systemic racism, I was denied and lost all contact with all my children, lost all my assets both times, and wound up literally right out on the street. I'm convinced that the reasons my children were taken from me has everything to do with the fact that I'm Indigenous, and therefore so are they.
This is a guy who's gone through so much hardship, and he really hasn't had much of a support system in his life. I'm Professor Dreman. I was born in Winnipeg, Canada, a city that I have great affection for to this day. My family has a long and established relationship with the city of Winnipeg. And I must say, my memories from childhood are, for the main part, positive. We lived in a Jewish neighborhood. I had lots of friends. I was involved in sports, and life was good.
To understand why Solly took such interest in Don, all you have to do is look at how Solly was raised.
My care and loving of people, of human relationships, of being in touch. I always remember my home as being kind of an open house, a little bit of mischief here and there, but to this day, my friends and myself recall my mom and my dad, Ray and Joe, with the most fondest of memories.
Joe Dreman and Ray Dreman were our other parents, but they were more tolerant than our parents. So we had a home away from home. If you wanted to go somewhere where you would truly be welcome in a true Yiddish way, you go to the Dremans on Saturday night.
Solly called me.
I was wondering if you know someone, a good videographer, someone who could do it and do that event. I'm also having a reunion for friends of mine in Winnipeg.
Solly, I know somebody. His name is Barnard. I just worked with him. I think you'd like him. It was a disaster. It really didn't go too well.
We had some difficulties because there is a difference of character, a difference of style. Solly is a highly motivated person who works very rapidly and sets high expectations, and he just drives right through like a bull in a china shop at times. And me, anytime I work, I get reported for welfare fraud. And every time I get reported for welfare fraud, there's an investigation. What he's paying me to do the job and what's going to happen with EIA is going to result in me making no money. but I like to work.
So how's it working out with Dawn?
What can I tell you? I must say, it's been kind of difficult.
Dawn was like Pita. If you take the initials, P-I-T-A, pain in the ass.
The way he says things is a little on the eccentric side sometimes. And, you know, people were so worried that he might hurt my feelings because he says things a certain way here or there. And I'm like, no. I know what he's got going on in here.
When I came to Winnipeg, I met Don personally, and I found out he wasn't such a bad guy. As a matter of fact, I found out that he's an extremely intelligent, warm, and very, very interesting personality.
So we did the job. And once we got talking, I liked him immediately in person. There was a human connection there. And that's something I struggle with. That doesn't happen with everybody, and it doesn't happen often.
I learned that Don was a great supporter of the state of Israel and identified greatly as a First Nations person with the Jewish people and their claims to their land and their rights to that land.
And that's something that a lot of people would question. Well, why does an impoverished First Nations kid that was a social outcast turn around and suddenly love Israel to the point that Jewish people are looking at him and saying, he gets it.
When Solly heard Don speak about Israel, he was moved by his support of the Jewish state.
You soon find out that I have a deep admiration for the Jewish people, and in particular what happened in the 70 years after the Holocaust, because I view the Holocaust as a genocide of a people. I view the Israeli people as an indigenous people to that land. I see them as having lost their land and tried multiple times to get it back and been driven out again and again. So to me, it's black and white. They're as indigenous to that land as my ancestors are to this land.
Solly loves Israel, and in his early 20s made a major decision to move to Israel.
Let's put it this way. Let's say I came out. I was a latent Zionist. My parents were major supporters of the Jewish community, both in Winnipeg and in Israel. And I know, I was very proud of my Jewishness.
We have always considered Solly a Renaissance man. He started by getting an undergraduate degree in business, followed by the equivalent of a master's degree in commerce. He then decided that he should take up law instead. After a while, he thought law was overrated and even boring. So again, following his excellent insight, he moved on to medicine for a spell. Unfortunately, medicine didn't quite cut it for him. After that, he came to a brilliant conclusion. Why study in English? It's just too easy. Solly decided to move to Jerusalem and study psychology in Hebrew. This was the challenge he was looking for, and he did amazingly well in it, earning his PhD in psychology before turning 50.
Being a psychologist in Israel, I had the opportunity to do things that I could not have done anywhere else in the world, whether it was working with victims of terrorism, Holocaust survivors, families in crisis, whether it was working with single-parent families or with immigration. I've had a very fulfilling life. What I want to talk about tonight is about the integration of new immigrants and refugees in Israel.
So Solly's lecture was on how they dealt with Russian Jews integrating into their society and dealing with violence and conflict. That impressed me because as a people, you don't see it in First Nations culture enough that they want to help each other.
Part of the problem is realizing, the diversity, right? Because we're not just talking about one Indigenous nation. We're talking about many, many different nations in many different parts of Canada And I think that part of the success of the colonial genocide to this point has been this divide and conquer mentality, and I think it's been more successful than we realized.
This is my band office. I had originally intended to film coming down this road as a going home, a return, a lost child finding his way back. But I've come to believe that they just simply don't want 60 scoop children coming back to the reserve. I think they're annoyed that the government chooses who joins their band and who doesn't. In contrast to how I was treated by my band, Dalia Paran's mother survived the Holocaust. The Jewish community in Israel embraced her and helped her to move there.
When she came here, she came with the Brigada, with the soldiers that came to Marseille and to Belgium to bring the young people, you know.
The Jewish community not only helped them come to Israel, but encouraged them to stay.
She said, I want back to Belgium to my parents. So we said, it's a pity. I have a cousin in Jerusalem. Let's go tomorrow. Maybe it will change your mind. His daughter, she slept in the kitchen in a small bed, and she gave the room to my mother.
It intrigued me because you don't see it in First Nations culture enough that they want to find lost children and bring them back. You don't see it.
When I first met Don, I saw a man with kind eyes. He told us about his difficult life, his bad luck, and that he was on the autistic spectrum. We felt we wanted to do something to make him happy.
How do you know I was thinking? I'd like to invite Don to Israel. What do you think about the idea?
Yeah, he could stay here with us, and Oren will take us touring all around the country.
Yeah, and family atmosphere for him, it's kind of very important. We're both enamored by Don, and I made a decision that I was going to invite him to Israel to join us and to try to give him a little TLC, tender love and care, which I...
So when Solly told him we were bringing him to Israel for a vacation, I could see Don saying in disbelief, sure, nobody did anything for me in my life, and these strangers are going to come and spoil me.
What I told myself is, don't make a big deal out of it, and don't bank on it.
When you get a dream like that, you might not know what it means right away, but then maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, who knows?
30 years.
Something's going to happen. Yeah, 30 years. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there you go.
You know, this to me was something that seemed preordained since I was a little kid. So I'm not going to say no.
I honestly thought that Solly, this time you really, really lost it. We know that Don is a good photographer, but really we don't know anything else about him.
I'm fearless, in all modesty, and Orly is less fearless than I am. And there were doubts, because quite frankly, I don't know anything about his moral precepts or background.
I'm capable of violence under certain circumstances. Camera E rolling, and action. I will never raise a hand to somebody I care about, even if they're abusing me. And autistic people often find social norms difficult to navigate without rules or structure. So I have rules. There's always been clear-cut self-defense.
At times, it works best if we're there in person to be kind of intermediaries, helping Dawn deal with tricky situations.
Hey, Dawn, how are you? Am I being charged with something? Not right now, no. A concern sent our way regarding the post you put on Facebook. I can remove that.
This thing with the police started when I reported a police officer for saying he wanted to kill Indians.
What's your name?
My name is Donald Barnard.
Okay, I'm going to put you through the RCMP. It's going to take a few minutes, though.
Okay. The RCMP at the highest levels has acknowledged that they have a racism problem.
Fighting systemic racism, unconscious bias, and discrimination is a top priority for our government.
That's a pre-existing condition. That existed prior to my birth.
I never regretted inviting Dan. Our love has been, by the way, a hard love. He's given me a lot of shit, and I've given him a lot of shit. But basically, I'm very enamored and taken with him. And that's the reason. And so we invited him.
That wasn't the only thing that Solly did for Don. He tried to help him in many different ways.
I knew that he was trying to establish a business. So I decided to buy him a video camera.
I said, you can't afford a professional camera. And he said, don't argue with me. And that's the camera we're filming this on.
I've tried to give him publicity in the local press. I also, by the way, knew that he was without a vehicle. So I also arranged through Larry Vicker, a very close friend of ours, to lease him a car.
It was a miracle. And again, there was no expectations. It was just a surprise. Solly just called up his friend, and his friend said, well, a friend of yours will help him.
I had no idea what would happen. I had hoped that it would be the basis of getting Don up on his feet and optimistic and more optimistic about life.
There were times where Solly tried to help Don, and that didn't always work out because Don can be unpredictable.
There have been some very difficult issues that I've had with Don, and one of them has been his postings on Facebook. And there was a period of time where I guess like in any family, biological or otherwise, there were cutoffs where I didn't want to have anything to do with Don. But in the end, I decided that, hey, and I've also experienced trauma, loss, pain, sometimes even minor despair.
But I keep coming out for more because I never give up. If I don't get it the first time, I try again and again and again and again and again and again. And I guess in my family life, it's the same thing.
I've managed with my family to attain a lot of things that I would never have expected to have attained. As a Jew, I've also been subjected to hardship, less than Don has been subjected to, and I know that my people have been subjected to hardships in their lifetime.
When Solly speaks about his people's hardships, he speaks about the Holocaust and other existential wars that afflicted the Jewish people.
I was chosen to be the brigade psychologist of the Jerusalem Brigade, and I was a combat soldier in the thick of things. By the way, that unit was wiped out in the Yom Kippur War, and I got out of it by the skin of my teeth.
Many of his friends are Holocaust survivors. Some were children during the Holocaust, and like many Indigenous children, were forced to hide or change their identities in order to survive.
They were not able to speak their language, celebrate their holidays, and they were removed from their culture. And that is similar to what Indigenous children had to go through in residential schools.
So when I came back home, I could not remember my language. I couldn't speak to my parents because they both spoke the language.
And that led to identity crisis for Holocaust survivors who survived the war but lost their identity. And the same for Indigenous children who survived the residential schools but lost their identity.
Relly Robinson was the only child of a Jewish couple from Poland. Her father smuggled her out of the ghetto. In order to save her life, he entrusted her with a Polish couple who raised her as their own.
Changing an identity is a total change of the personality.
After World War II, Jewish people did everything they could to find Jewish children that had lost their identity and encouraged them to reclaim it. It wasn't always easy.
Dianina went with me to join to register me as a Jewish surviving child. And in that building, I saw people, with gray and black clothes, and all of them pale and limping. And I said to myself, I'll be never like these people. I am a Polish girl. I was made aware of my Jewishness, but I didn't relate to it in any way except in the negative way. And I kept being ashamed of the fact that I was Jewish.
It's difficult to get rid of the stigma and self-hate a society instills in you. People learn to hate who they are. Like many Indigenous children who learn to hate their dark skin, like my father, I also learned to hate who I was. One of the things that happened to me in the foster care system was I started to become embarrassed of being Indigenous to the point that I wore long sleeve clothes to avoid getting suntanned.
שהוא נרגש מאוד, והוא בחר ביחד עם אשתו אורלי, שהם רוצים לתרום.
I did my master's and my doctoral thesis on the subject of altruism, and I never understood why I did it. But I found out during my lifetime that I like to give. And I think that Dawn for me was an opportunity really to give to someone without expecting anything in return. And, you know, it was just kind of natural for me to invite Dawn to come with us.
Listen, I have to prepare you since you've never been overseas. You have to go now and take out a passport. Don't forget to bring your medications and prepare.
She's a Jewish mom, which is very caring and a little bit over. It was a huge deal for me. I had to go to the airport 5 times before the trip to familiarize myself with all the things that were going to be different. I had to pack and unpack my bags a dozen times. I was obsessed over it for a long time.
Well, I'm sitting at the airport getting ready to embark on my trip to Israel. And so begins our next leg of my trip as I board the plane for Tel Aviv.
Getting there after leaving February Winnipeg weather and getting out there where it's nice and warm, and you know, I'm standing there in my t-shirt and Orly and Sully have got their winter coats on was kind of humorous.
From the moment that he stepped into our house and for the full week that he stayed with us, it was a pleasure. He was quiet, cooperative, polite, not the way he behaves sometimes now, but it was no issue, and both Orly and I enjoyed his company immensely.
What they did just astounded me. It was just like one gift and surprise after another. We did a 1-week tour of the country. We went all over the north.
Hi, welcome to the city of Akko. We are now in the northern part of Israel, in Akko, which is on the...
They also made a high priority to look into going to some of the Christian sites, which was extremely generous of them because I am Christian. There's something that you cannot put into words, but you can feel it when you go to some of these religious holy sites. If you're a spiritually inclined person on any level, you will feel it. For a crowded place, loud and noisy, did not trigger the kind of anxiety I get going into crowded, noisy places everywhere else.
It was a wonderful week, and I only have fond memories of it. First of all, also for us, it was a blessing because, for example, Orly's son, Oren, is a tour guide, and we never had the opportunity to tour with him. Secondly, we had an opportunity to be exposed to a different culture and to add to a different culture. So no regrets. It was a great trip.
Now the smoke is what's considered sacred. So you would smudge the smoke towards your mind and then towards your chest and then your body. And that's your mind, your heart, and your body. And basically you would say your prayers.
I'm glad we adopted him. I got to nag him not to skip breakfast. He even learned to eat Jewish foods like chont, chamin, falafel, and to wipe the hummus plate, he learned. This is how I taught him. And he even learned to shop in a Middle Eastern style.
The one thing that Orly did that I really liked was I had very little money of my own, and I would talk to Orly. We'd be walking through the markets and stuff, and I would say, you know what, I think that would be a really, and then Orly would run over there and she would negotiate with them, and she'd have this. People were almost in tears a couple of times. Take it and go, just to get rid of. But yeah, I felt like I've got this master negotiator that's helping me make sure I didn't get taken advantage of, and that really it was a nice feeling. It was a sense of security that I don't normally experience. That's why I say she's my adopted mom, because she acts like a mom.
See, this is why you don't send men to shop. I will buy this print with elephants on it for my girlfriend and get killed.
Israel is a democratic country. It is unusually multicultural. People from all religions and races live there and enjoy the many benefits the country has to offer. It is also a country that struggles with many security threats, including war and terrorism. So when we go to a mall, and we have to go through a security checkpoint to get into the mall. When you're going through these checkpoints at Israel, they're doing their jobs because there's always a security threat. I'm sorry, but you've got a little tiny country. You've got millions of people surrounding that country that all say they want to kill you. You kind of have to, but they're professional and they're polite. There's not 5 people standing beside you with backpacks and you're the one that gets singled out. As an Indigenous person in Canada, I had very different kinds of encounters with security guards. Being followed around by security guards, being followed around by store staff, being stopped and carted by police, having people want to check your bag everywhere you go. I get to the point here in Canada that somebody says, we want to check your bag. I look at them dead in the eyes and I tell them point blank, there is no way in hell I'm going to let store clerk take away my civil rights. That's how frustrated I am at the way I've been treated my entire life here in Canada. Solly wanted me to speak to his friends and learn more about the country and the Jewish people.
To give him a message about the possibility to survive from a cultural and social genocide that he personally has experienced, show how we here in Israel have managed to build a miracle of a nation.
Genocide of First Nations people on this continent was a long, slow burning ember fire. What happened to the Jewish people during the Holocaust was a flash fire. It was an explosion.
There are many similarities between the Jewish people and the Indigenous people in Canada. There are also many differences between us, especially with how we dealt with the aftermath of genocide.
Israel, for me, is one of the grandest experiments in psychotherapy there ever was. A victim people build a new country under very difficult circumstances, and there emerges a pride of being, a pride of identity, which is remarkable.
When I spoke with Solly's friends, I learned a lot about Israel, the importance of unity, mutual responsibility, and about overcoming collective trauma. Most Israelis are Jews. They share the same religion and celebrate the same holidays. But Jewish people are also different from one another on almost every level. Some are religious, some are secular, some are on the left of the political spectrum, and some are on the right. Some are white, some are dark, even black-skinned. Most have strong opinions, and they argue a lot, but unlike Indigenous people, they have more that unites them than separates them from one another. When push comes to shove, they understand that they are all in this together.
We are one big family, one big nation. Secular, ultra-Orthodox, big kippah, small kippah, half kippah, reforms, conservative, I just don't care. As my father said, when I enter to a Jewish house, I feel at home.
Unity can be fragile, but it is the foundation for the success of surviving as a nation.
In the past, we had to fight against others. Now I think that we have a very important mission, from my point of view, maybe the most important mission. We must stay united. We must. Otherwise, another catastrophe, but because of us.
If Jewish people found a way to unite their differences, we must do it also. Tecumseh once said that a single twig breaks, but the bundle is strong. As an Indigenous person, I believe that we need to find our native commonalities and celebrate them to strengthen the ties that bind us together. We are all survivors of a 400-year-long genocide. We have an obligation to pursue justice and supports for each other.
After the Holocaust, every Jew in the world felt an obligation to rescue the remnants of the Jewish population in Europe.
When I did my interviews over in Israel, You have a person that risked his life to save 1,000 people to bring them there before they formed the country. Why would he do it? His answer was, well, they were Jews. I'm a Jew. I wanted to help. Murray Greenfield is a great example of Jews that risked their lives in order to save other Jews. Murray participated in World War II as an American soldier. He served in the Navy and learned a lot about ships. After the war, he was able to use his skills to save Jews.
He explained to me that there are people in America who are buying old vessels with the idea of rebuilding them to get to Europe and carry Jews out of Europe. It was illegal as far as the British were concerned, and you may go to jail. I felt like a big hero. To me, I'm going to go out and save Jewish lives after the Holocaust.
Israel is a safe place where Jews all over the world can be rescued.
Israel became a symbol for the continued existence of the Jewish people, so Jewish people support her in many ways.
Most of you don't know this, but in the '67 war, the per capita giving to support Israel was the highest in Winnipeg and all of North America.
And as the only Jewish state in the world, it is Israel's responsibility to help Jews who are in trouble or if they want to immigrate there.
Then Prime Minister Begin in 1977, 1978 said, bring me the brothers from Ethiopia. And then the Mossad, to which I then belong, which deals also with Jewish affairs abroad, in fact, especially when it relates to trying to save Jews, launched a great operation of bringing Jews over Sudan to Israel.
Jews have an independent state with the freedom to act in the best interest of their own citizens. Indigenous people here in Canada need a separate nation-to-nation relationship with Canada so that we too can be safe in our own lands.
Let me share some of my thoughts on Tel Aviv. You will never see another place like Tel Aviv. There's no place on earth like this city. In Tel Aviv, you see an incredible mix of ancient and new. It is a busy place, full of busy people, motorcycles, bicycles, and at times even the occasional automobile willing to make use of the sidewalks if the roads are too congested. Like jungle cats, they move quickly. They come out of surprising places. The roads are narrow, yet after a couple of hours, you are so used to it, you learn a rhythm.
And I think Israeli society, for people coming out from outside of Israel and they come here, they feel the energy. They feel the way that things are being built.
And what they've done in 70 years, our people haven't been able to do here in North America for the last 150. Building a nation, an economy, military, their own police.
The achievements of our country and what has been built here, this is something you can see with your eyes and observe and admire. But what's more important is the human contact that people have made here, coming from different countries and actually becoming one nation.
People turn to one another for support.
The only thing that people really have after severe trauma is other people.
I am very thankful to the family that has helped me with their love and with their experience of building this country, which I have absorbed in my heart. I love Israel and I am very proud being Jewish and being Israeli.
You need someone to really be there, able to listen to the most horrific stories and help them regulate themselves.
Indigenous communities have been left to regulate their own trauma without help or appropriate support. Due to the fact that so many generations were affected by the consequences of colonization, we were not able to help ourselves, much less be able to help each other.
You don't know what to do with those feelings because you got nobody to turn to other than your own family, and they're all feeling the same way, hurt and alienated, you know? So what do? You drink and take it out on your wife, or...
The effects of the intergenerational trauma have led to whole communities struggling with addiction and astronomical rates of suicide. Indigenous people have double the rates of suicide of the national average, and Inuit communities tend to have even higher rates. While in Israel, I noticed trauma and tension manifest itself in interesting ways.
Israel is known to have a high level of traffic accidents. People express their tension and their expectation that people want to attack them and you have to protect yourself. And that is another way how adrenaline continues to flow in our veins. And adrenaline is very nice, you know, it feels good, it feels very alive. But if you can't let it go, then it can become dangerous.
Just like in the Indigenous communities in Canada, trauma is multi-generational. During the many years of war and terrorism, more generations of children, soldiers, and citizens were affected by traumatic experiences. When Dr. Brahm moved to Israel in 1988, he was surprised by the way the country was coping with, or not coping with, trauma.
At that time, the idea was that it's better not to talk about trauma.
My father was a sole survivor from an entire family. He didn't talk about it. From his point of view, he tried that we will be as normal as possible.
And our mother came from Belgium, and we knew she was a Holocaust survivor, but we didn't know what she passed through the years of the Holocaust. She never told us. She wanted to forget, maybe.
This becomes a weight that sits on the whole personality. I mean, even if you have an apparently successful person, they're suffering. And they're conveying that feeling in many of their intimate moments, always to themselves and to others, such as their next generations.
You can't ignore trauma. It has a way of rearing its ugly head and rising to the surface, even if you do not talk about it. You know, I do wonder what would have happened if my parents had better dealt with their trauma. You know, at the time, I most certainly did not understand my parents' behavior.
One thing that I think he talked about it almost every week. And it was a question, why did I survive and all my family was murdered and burned by the Nazis in Auschwitz?
I couldn't understand why my mother hated yellow flowers, especially sunflower. If you know the Provence, you know Van Gogh, there are big sunflowers like this. And when they heard the Nazis will come, they flew out of the window, and during the whole night, they stood under the sunflower, and their body like this, I can imagine the frightness and the trauma.
Many second-generation survivors were affected by their parents' experiences without even knowing it.
He devoted his life to education. And he said that there are two things that are relevant for the Jewish people: education and being able to protecting ourselves. And in a way, I understood that he expected me to do the second thing that is important from his point of view, and it is to serve in the Air Force.
In a way, General Schetti answered his father's question and gave him closure when he commanded over the bombing of the nuclear weapon facility in Syria.
Prime Minister in those days sent me a letter, and he expressed his appreciation about what we did and how we did and what is the meaning for the state of Israel and for the Jewish nation, this attacking and destroying the nuclear reactor in Syria. He knew the story of my father, and at the end of the letter he wrote, "Warm regards to your father." when I saw that he's probably will pass away very soon, I realized that I should show him the letter. I felt that in the first time in his whole life, he understood why he survived.
Well, on the subject of closure, none of us have closure, because as long as the injury is still being inflicted, closure doesn't happen. I tried to understand how, despite all this trauma, Israel is such an industrious and successful country.
In the trauma field, a new concept came up, and that is post-traumatic growth. That is the whole question of, do also good things come out of going through trauma? Now, Israel was established with people coming from all over after being persecuted in different countries. And what we've seen is that they came in with an enormous amount of energy. And you can call it survival energy. You really want to survive well, and you become very creative in the way you do that.
People have evolved from the trauma and used it, and used the energy of the trauma of fear of annihilation to build a growing and prospering country.
Our nation suffered the biggest catastrophe of the history of the Jewish nation, no doubt about it. And now we are in the biggest miracle of the Jewish nation ever, the state of Israel.
Post-traumatic growth, what a powerful concept. It's astounding in its own right. I mean, it's an equally important story to the Holocaust. That rapid rate of recovery is astounding to me. I look at that and I see inspiration and hope. I see something that I would try to emulate for my children's sake. Speaking to all of Sully's friends and seeing Israel with my own eyes helped me to gain confidence regarding the recovery of my people. We began our journey and we are on our way to recovery, but we need to continue to strengthen our unity, embrace and support one another, relearn and develop pride in our stolen culture. Recovering from genocide is a long and painful process, but it will come. As for me, I have begun reclaiming my identity.
So that you have good eyes, and you'll use those good eyes to look at yourself in a good way, knowing that you are still loved by many people.
I've gone to the trouble of trying to learn some of the culture back. I went out and I performed for the Aboriginal School of Dance. I learned a lot of our history. I feel that despite all the efforts that Canada used to turn us into something we are not, the task to kill the Indian in me has failed. I still enjoy many activities that are part of my culture. It's in my DNA and nothing will change it.
Well, Dawn, we're at the end of our journey. It's been kind of nice having you.
Yeah, it's been kind of nice being here.
You've been a bit of a pain in the ass, but to tell you the truth, it's been a wonderful week. We've seen Israel through your eyes. You've given us a perspective about the country that is extremely interesting, and I think it's extremely important. God bless you. Have a good trip home, and it's been wonderful.
It has been wonderful.
I was thankful to Orly and Sully for allowing me to get a glimpse of what family, love, and acceptance can achieve for a people and for an individual. I came back to Canada empowered and motivated to change my life. I came back with hope for myself, and hope that I could inspire my people. I was inspired to make a film about my newfound family and the lessons I learned in Israel.
We were all excited to help Don create the film because we all felt that this film is very important. But unfortunately, things did not go according to plans.
Dawn, in the last little while, has melted down and copped out. And I must say that we're very concerned.
Sully tried to encourage Don to continue to work on the film, but it was extremely difficult because Don was still struggling with many of the same issues he dealt with before he went to Israel. This project turned out to be very difficult for everyone involved, but especially for Don. He had to relive traumatic events and found differences of opinions extremely challenging. But probably the biggest obstacle came when the COVID-19 pandemic hit.
Because of my disabilities, I'm one of those people that cannot wear a mask. So even getting access to basic services like food, gasoline, comes with challenges. The abilities are there, but so are the disabilities. The disability can rear its ugly head anywhere, anytime, under almost any circumstances, and it's there whether I like it or not. I have good days and bad days, but good day or bad day, I remember to tell them that I love them. And you know what? That's what families do.